Thanks for inviting me. It's nice to return sometimes to my first interests. So I would like to combine epistemology and deontic logic, so to speak, or normative logic. The motivation is that some people say today that epistemic concepts are normative in a sense. And this is a question in which sense. Let's first introduce some... Please excuse me because I first time use this device. So first, some formal machinery, very elementary. This is a logical square. The most popular version is for categorical sentences. So A, maybe every S is P, B, no S is P, gamma, some S are P, and delta, some S are not P. This is a standard interpretation which is probably known to everybody in this room because this is taught at legal faculties. However, we have several well-known connections. So, for example, A and P are contrary, A entails B, B entails D, delta, alpha and beta are contradictory, and so on. Moreover, we have some definitions which show relations between particular concepts. However, we have several other interpretations. Deontic, we will read alpha as A is obliged, or it is obligatory that A, this second reading is better because it clearly shows syntactic role of A as propositional argument. Then beta is A is impossible, but not A is necessary. And gamma is it is permitted that A, and it is permitted that not A. All relations are preserved from this original Aristotelian square. So we have several other interpretations, in particular epistemic, and we list at the moment only one, namely that I know that A, it is very convenient to use first person statement, and respectively I know that not A, I don't know that A, and R don't know that not A, gamma is I don't know that not A. What is interesting, still one explanation, interpretation is axiological. It is good that A, it is good that not A, or it is bad that A, it is not bad that not A, and it is not good that A. What is interesting that some, as also called this alectic modalities, like it is necessary that A, it is necessary that not A, it's impossible that A, possible that A, and possible that not A. What is interesting, and this is a good, I think, hint, that some cases have special words in natural language. I mean possibility and permission, other not. So you cannot, at least I don't know any word which captures the meaning of it is not bad that not A. So moral or axiological permissibility, but is not used in natural language. So we can extend to hexagon Me is it is possible that A, and it is possible that not A. It is permitted that A, it is permitted that not A. It means normative indifference. Once again, our possibility gives a kind of accidentality or also modal indifference. So once again, we have, and Ni is not very interesting. It is disjunction or alpha and beta, so it is obligatory or it is forbidden or prohibited. It is necessary or it is impossible. So it is not very interesting. However, in order to complete this diagram, we need this point. Once again, we have accidentality as a special word, indifference also as a special word, but it cannot express other epistemic or other modal in wide sense concept in the bottom of this diagram, and so Ni and Ni are contradictory, and alpha or beta or Ni are exhaustive. So it's complete, it's elementary logic. And what is more important is octagon. We add two more points, kappa and lambda. We can read A and not A, where A is a prepositional formula. And now there is a question. The situation is not now is much more complicated, because it depends on assumed basic logic. In two-valued logic, of course, A and not A are contradictory, but if we take linear Łukasiewicz logic, the situation is different. However, more interesting is a problem how A is related to necessity or obligation. Yes? So a standard account is that in deontic logic we have the following situation, that it is not true that A implies, logically implies, it is obligatory that A, and also of course the reverse implication doesn't hold. The same is for permission, what is maybe not so clear. However, it is usually accepted, at least in deontic logic. But in alectic modal logic, the situation is of course different. Namely, necessity implies truth or reality, or what you want, and A implies it is possible that A. So it is an important difference between deontic or normative in this classical sense interpretation and alectic interpretation or standard model interpretation. Now, what about epistemic interpretations? We have here a very tricky problem. Because if you take classical definition of knowledge, on which I know that A is equivalent to the conjunction of I believe that A is true, and A is justified. Now, under this definition, knowledge implies truth. But it's very exceptional. Of course, this definition is criticized. There are several counter-examples, like Gettier examples and so on. I will not enter into this question. However, this classical definition is plausible. Please consider the following experiment, or linguistic experiment. I say, well, I know that A, however, I don't believe that A. So it is maybe not logical contradiction, but pragmatic contradiction. Let's say, not plausible under ordinary meaning of this word. I know that A, but A is false or not true. So I know that today is Sunday, for example. So reply is, you cannot know that because it is false that today is Sunday. I know that A, however, A is not justified. No, you can guess, you can assume, you can desire or something like that. However, you cannot say, I know that A and A is not justified. So there are several arguments for this definition. On the other hand, at least in my view, is something is exceptional from logical point of view. I am suspicious about that. More important is that there is no sound semantics for this meaning of I know, contrary to a good semantics for deontic logic, modal logic, even axiological logic, if you like. So there's a question about knowledge, and because knowledge is a special epistemic concept, so some people distinguish between epistemic context and so-called doxastic context. So epistemic is related to I know. Behind this a very long and respected philosophical tradition, going back to Plato and his analysis of knowledge, to the Greek concept of episteme and so on. However, we have also several other epistemic concepts like I accept, I assert, I think, I desire, and so I believe, and so on. Formally speaking, they obey all formal rules which we can derive from these generalized logical squares. Also, this is the same question, but not the same, but it's clearly, if I assume that A, it doesn't imply that I believe that A is true or A is justified. Sometimes yes, sometimes not. For example, if I assume that A is an axiom, so I believe in this, I believe that it is true, I believe that it is justified, and so on. But in other cases, the situation is different. However, what is interesting that in most cases, formal rules are preserved. Of course, there are some dubious cases as well. For example, so-called perceptual modalities. I see, I hear that A, or some habitual modalities, I am writing that A, and so on. I am not sure about logical connections, because I have some counter-examples. However, a closer analysis could show that these counter-examples don't work. However, we can ignore. It is a very wide class of epistemic cases in which these formal rules are satisfied. Other dubious cases, it is probable that A, for example, because it depends on interpretation, objective or subjective. Also, maybe still one case is wanted to mention, namely, I am asking that A, because the same formal rules are preserved. If I am asking whether A or why A, I don't assume that A is true in most cases. Now, it's formal analogies between epistemic and normative and deontics and axiological concepts raise the question, is there a kind of normativity involved in epistemic contexts? There are simple cases which maybe not support positive answer, but at least stimulate a discussion. For example, say, I accept that does it entail that I should accept in some conditions, and in some conditions I should reject? If so, what does it mean, I should? It is a moral duty to accept something, or another kind of duty, or sometimes even a legal duty. Judges should accept something or reject something. It's a kind of blame if I will not accept. This issue is discussed at least since 1877, when William Clifford, a philosopher and mathematician, published a very famous essay, The Ethics of Belief, in which he gave a positive answer to this question. There is something like ethics of belief, and accepting beliefs is also an axiological issue. This essay was immediately criticized by William James, who found some counter examples to Clifford. And after years, particularly in last decades, there are several books and contributions to virtual epistemology, on which positive or realizing epistemic attitude is related to moral duties, obligation, permissions, and so on. So Susan Haag, well, you probably know her because she participated several times in congresses of legal philosophy. She tried give a panorama or a map of possible relations between terminology is not established. Some people say about normative appraisal of epistemic attitudes or these decisions, other about axiological. And so I will use axiological in a wide sense for a while, namely covering deontology and axiology, so to speak. So according to her, first possibility is that epistemic acceptability or activity entails axiological. So every epistemic activity is by necessity also an axiological. now it's a question of reverse connection. So if we accept this, so there's a very strong relation of equivalence between axiology and epistemology. The second is that there are parallel. Unfortunately, most writers don't explain what does it mean. Third possibilities are analogical, so they obey the same formal rules, like in my presentation. I don't think that I accept this. Next is there are mutually independent, so it's only it's not logically or even connected by necessity. And the final possibility distinguished by her is the overlap. Sometimes it happens that epistemic appraisal, epistemic evaluation is moral, sometimes not. The criterion is that in some cases a person who don't accept, for example, don't accept some statements, propositions, discussion should be later?
In the separate session.
Second? Okay, so I will finish there.
No, 10 minutes.
Okay, I understand. So if I don't accept a statement, A, in the situation, if I have some sufficient justification, some good reasons to accept, and in this case, I could be blamed that I did if I did consciously, I did something wrong. Not only from epistemic point of view, but also moral point of view. This way, but it was not developed systematically. However, it was in at least some cases, it was a standpoint of Kazimierz Twardowski and his students like Isidora Domska in Krakow, for example. I remember that she very strongly insisted that at least in some cases rejection of acceptance of statements, rejection of statements which are justified, and acceptance of statements which are not justified is also something like a moral wrongness, not only epistemic of cognitive failure, but also something which someone should be blamed for doing so. Yes or not? I have no solution for this dilemma. I think that in some cases, for example, in law, this is the case, but it must be formalized in a sense. Must be rules which say that witnesses should tell truth, or judges should abstain from giving sentences without the proper justification, and so on. So if they are strict, explicit, or at least intuitive rules, so this is okay. But in other cases, it is difficult to solve. For example, in legal cases, the judge is obliged to give a sentence. He or she cannot abstain. No, please wait. That's my colleague does that. I am not convinced, so I will give up this case. It is impossible on legal rules. However, in case of epistemic situations, for example, the scientist says, no, I have no reason to pro or contra, so let us wait, let us perform new experiments. At the moment, I must be neutral to the solution of subject. There is a big difference. So, for this reason, I think that we cannot give a general solution of this ethics of belief. However, there are some additional problems, namely, clearly, if we return to the classical definition of knowledge, once again, I know that P means that I believe that A is true and A is justified. So belief is not a normative concept, or is very slightly normative. Truth is also not a normative concept. However, justification, yes, because there are certainly a normative theory of justification, not all otherwise. Maybe more properly, if I say that every contemporary definition of justification is normative to some extent. So this is one reason to treat epistemic concepts as normative, at least the concept of knowledge. Other is quite recent. Even yesterday I read a book about normativity, afterwards Wedgwood, something like a young American philosopher, and according to him, every epistemic concept is intentional, but intentionality is normative. So his argument is that if I accept, guess, desire, and so on, it must be directed to something, and this direction is related to be rational or justified. I must say that I don't agree with this idea, because I can direct my attitudes to some objects without any justification, without any attitude, or sometimes with this attitude, otherwise, other attitude, and so on. To finish now, because the chairman warned me about time, famous Hume thesis about normative in strict sense statements, A should be, and indicative statements say that there is no logical connection, no logical inference from A to it should be that A. Interesting is that we can generalize this thesis to epistemic context, to most epistemic context. My guess is to all, however, of this empirical hypothesis. Anyway, I don't know any counterexample except this tricky problem of classical definition of knowledge. This one general remark, and it suggests this situation that in fact, actually, we have some kind of normativity in epistemic concept, in epistemic context, in epistemic discourse, which is analogical to that of deontic or classical normative discourse. Now, how to explain this situation? Only my general view is that we need some kind of naturalism, which is maybe not very fashionable solution, because there are so many anti-naturalists like naturalists. However, I think that there is no other way to connect both kinds of normativity than by some generally naturalistic picture of our relation to the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.